G'day and welcome to another wee video. I'm making this one because I quite frequently get asked if I do videos or classes or anything for kids, and the short answer is no, I don't. Generally and I don't have an age bracket really, but and I'll get into the explanation of all of this, but generally from late teenagers on, I find to be fairly responsive to what I teach and what I offer, but it's always that I tend to make my videos and structure classes and workshops and things around the requests that I get to do so, which tends to be more from people in their mid to late 30s, early 40s, people who've become despondent with the world after giving it a red hot crack and finding out they're just not getting anywhere and falling into a dark heap and all of that sort of thing, midlife crisis, etc. It's not that I don't do anything with kids. I've had parents bring their kids up here, and we've sat and had like a little round robin thing, and with a very good response, actually, very good response. And I've had in the last 12 months, I've had 2, maybe 3 feedback emails and messages and whatever from parents who've been up here with their kids, who've expressed a great depth of gratitude for the change that the meeting has brought about in their child, in helping them to cope with the world they see around them. And one of those was with a child who was cutting, and another one who was just expressing suicidal tendencies and all of that sort of thing. And I mean, it's all dark thoughts. It doesn't matter what the manifestation of those thoughts shows up as in the physical life. The bottom line is you don't want the thinking that promotes that kind of activity in the first place. So what I find generally is that most people are not so receptive, and I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush here, but just in a very, very broad and very general sense, most people are not so receptive to spiritual ideas and open to spiritual practices until they reach generally about their mid-20s, and they start to question the world. And then, of course, at that stage, if they don't find any answers to their questions, they tend to get sidetracked by work and relationships and other things, or end up in the government system where they're usually channeled through a psychologist or whatever to a psychiatrist, prescribed things for their depression and all of the rest of it, and end up as a number in a system. And most of the people, young and old, who I speak to regarding that side of things don't want to be in that frame of reference, or they tell me they don't want to be in that frame of reference. And some of them actually do whatever it takes to get out of it. But however, I would not advise anyone, little caveat to that, I would not advise anyone to stop taking medication that's been prescribed or anything just because they feel like they've got a grip on their spiritual power, if you like, or spiritual mastery now, and can control the sort of the dark thoughts and the thinking that they're having in their mind through meditation, etc., etc. It generally takes quite a while before there is a level of competency reached, firstly with understanding the concepts of a true spiritual journey, and secondly with the proficiency of applying the principles of that journey to the particulars of your own life as it shows up in relationships, situations, events, etc., that might ordinarily trigger you and cause you to go into a downward spiral. So having said that, and I think that's all the preamble I really need, but having said that, I thought I would make this video with kids in mind. I did a spiritual circle with my daughter and one of her friends the other day at the beach. We were down there, and there was I don't know how to talk about this part of it, but when you it's like when you know somebody for a long time, and you can pick their moods and their energy and whatever, and you want to ask them what's wrong, because you know there's something wrong and that sort of thing, or they're thinking about something, or they're lost in their thoughts and all of that. So when you persist in spiritual practices, one of the things that occurs is you become quite empathetic, and you generally get a very good sense of when there's something that can perhaps be addressed, or when there's something that's perhaps needs a little bit of fine-tuning in a relationship or in a situation. So I picked that up in this situation where my daughter was having one of her friends stay over for a couple of nights, and I thought there's something a little off here. So I offered the girls to do a spiritual circle down the beach, and of course her friend had never done one, and my daughter and I have often done quite far-reaching and in-depth spiritual probes into the psychology of the human consciousness and the human condition, even at the level she's at as a very young age. And now when I talk to her, she's in her mid-teens. When I talk to her now, she's very proficient at being able to identify particular traits and particular patterns and things in her own thinking and in the thinking of the human condition as a whole, as being coming from a dualistic perspective of good and bad, right and wrong, better and worse, which of course is the yin-yang of thinking, which doesn't serve anybody, because trying to think from one perspective within that yin-yang, it attracts the other as well. So you have the good and the bad, and everybody tries to have positive thoughts or good thoughts, but of course that implies bad thoughts and negative thoughts, and these things, it's a circle. And if you've ever sat and watched your thinking over a period of time, or made a mental note of your triggers, you'll realize they tend to come around in a cyclical kind of a pattern, and you'll start to see the setup in the relationships you're in, where your familiar partner or your person at work or whatever it is will begin to present you with a very familiar energetic or emotional presence, and you'll start to feel that emotionality getting triggered in you again, and you'll be like, oh, not this again. Now, you can recognize it as a very simple construct like that, but as you begin to broaden your mind and broaden your outlook towards a holistic perspective on things, you begin to pick up those cycles in seemingly separated or seemingly situations and events that aren't your particular reference points. But of course, from a point of view of I'm one with everything, of course they are. There's no separation. They might seem to be out there in a far distant sort of situation with people, situations and events, but that doesn't mean that they're not ideas in my mind that also have the power and the potential to affect me at a certain point when I give a greater relationship or a greater value to those particular cycles, quite often unbeknownst by me. Right, it's very easy to buy into some drama or something and think that it's nothing, and then to find later on down the track that what you've bought into is actually beginning to affect you, even though you didn't think it would at the time. So what I wanted to make in response to the request, do I do anything for kids, was to present a very simple construct, a very simple outline of the human condition that kids can relate to, and I know they relate to this to this one. They always nod their heads when I talk to them, my daughter especially. But to present a very simple outline of the human condition, the nature of life on earth, as in the idea of why am I here, what's it all about, and what am I here to do? Right? Now, most kids, and I remember this for myself, going to my mother, or I think maybe my dad first. Dad used to have all these little Buddhas when I was a kid, and always intrigued me, these little Buddha statues that he collected, and I guess he'd kind of studied or read a little bit about Buddhism, and he's always been fairly peaceful about things. But I went to him and I asked him, why am I here, or what was the meaning of life, or something like that, and I remember him saying to me, oh, I don't really know, go and ask your mother. And when I asked my mother that question, she said something to me along the lines of, you're here to figure it out for yourself. And she referred me to a book, The Seven Flames of Consciousness, I think, by an author called Sundar Tarakan. I might be wrong about that. It's a long time ago since I was a early teen. But anyway, I didn't get shut down by my parents, which was good. I was encouraged to make self-inquiry, which was even better. And one of the things I would always offer kids is not to shut them down, or offer you for your kids, if you're seeking advice how to help your kids in life, is to allow them to be open-minded to the diversity of information and beliefs and structures of perhaps even religions and spiritual practices and things that are out there, so that they can pick and choose what it is that seems to fit for them in the situation where they find themselves, which may stay with them their whole lives, or it may perhaps evolve and change as they go along and grow and begin perhaps to question more, or maybe that's all they need to question. There's no real structure to a spiritual journey. I mean, it's a journey of no distance in the space of an instant of reality. It's just a realization of truth. But of course, that's experiential, and experience is the teacher. But getting to that point where we can learn how to access the experience through learning how to use our minds, learning how to process our emotions and things like that, it's kind of important, you know, unless kids have a way to understand life for themselves and to be able to look at their own individual situation based on some principles that can help them. What do they do with their emotions? They either push them down or they react to them. Either way, it's not helpful and it's not healthy. They might end up cutting themselves, or they might end up turning within and becoming very introverted, rather than releasing them to the spirit, whatever your perceptions of that might be. Releasing those emotional states to the spirit or to the higher mind for processing and healing. We call that healing. It takes a bit. So I like to present the backdrop for the application of such principles of forgiveness, patience, tolerance, generosity, giving and receiving, and empathy, compassion, and all these sorts of things. I like to present the backdrop for the application of those principles in a person's life through a story. Now, this is a story you can tell to your kids. And also, whilst we're on that subject, there's a beautiful book for kids, for younger kids, I think up to about the age of 10, 12 maybe, called Little Soul in the Sun, S-U-N, and it's written by Neale Donald Walsch. And I've read it through, and it's beautiful. It's really, really nicely written, pictures, all that sort of thing. A really good bedtime story for kids, and it puts other premises into their mind, into their thinking, which automatically helps them, like an equalizer on a stereo system, helps them to adjust the frequencies of their thoughts. It helps them to adjust their reactions to their thoughts accordingly, to help balance and keep, not really balance, but to keep peaceful their thinking about certain situations. So Little Soul in the Sun by Neale Donald Walsch. Of course, everybody probably knows Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. Illusions, also by Richard Bach, for older kids, sort of mid to older teens. And even Dan Millman's book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, about a high school student who has an injury and all his hopes for making it on the team are dashed, and he learns how to deal with his disappointment and all these sorts of things. Anyway, but to get back to it, I like to present a backdrop or a preamble for the application of principles in story form. Right now, very similar to the story of the fall from grace, or the war in heaven, or the idea of Adam and Eve, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just a story. You can take it literally if you want, or you can take it figuratively. It's not going to change the efficacy of the story, because it's the application of the principles in relationship to where you find yourself in the story that matter, right? Which is why I'm not an advocate of religion as such, But if that's something you feel you need to get into and need to take your kids to as a way of introducing them to ideas and concepts beyond the temporal self, that's great. But just remember that a person's journey is a journey to self, not a journey of participation with any kind of religious organization. That may be part of it, but that needs to be, as in any teaching and learning relationship, it needs to be a temporary part, and a part that you transit through quite quickly, really, because you don't want to learn codependency. You don't want to become dependent on an external structure for your peace of mind and for your sanity. You want to be able to pull into account the particulars of your own mental toolbox yourself, right, and be able to apply it. So the story that I like to offer is the story that we are in eternity right now, right? We are spirit, we are eternal, we are created in the likeness of God, which is formless as spirit, right? We are in eternity and we are dreaming right now. Now, in the Bible, if you go right into Genesis, the story reference that I have there is that Adam was put into a deep sleep by God to extract the rib to make Eve, and there's nowhere in the Bible that references God ever having woken him up. All right. So in the story I tell, we're all descendants of Adam as a figurative kind of expression. We're all descendants of Adam. We were born into Adam's dream, into the Christ mind's dream, Adam being the son of God, being the creation of God, given consciousness, etc., born into that dream. And we find ourselves within, and the Aboriginal people of Australia also refer to this experience on earth as the dreaming or the dream time, as do Hindus refer to this as the Maya, the illusion, the great illusion, and Buddhists refer to the world as the mental projection of the internal self, right? It's not really real, right? Now, that might come as a shock, or you might suddenly go, oh, that makes sense. But whatever, it doesn't really matter how you take the story on board. I mean, obviously, do your own research, figure it out for yourself. Don't take my word for anything. I mean, this is your own journey, right? Use me as a stepping stone, perhaps to either advance whatever, or maybe you'll just listen to my video and just, no, too much waffle or too much spiritual psychobabble nonsense, whatever. That doesn't matter. Where you're at is where you're at. But I've found that in life, nothing is ever lost by being open-minded and being willing to listen and to allow what goes in to go in, and to allow what doesn't really settle anywhere, just to let it go. Right? You'll find that the stuff that does get in will come useful to you, and the stuff that perhaps you think you're letting go of, you may remember it years down the track, and you'll be like, oh, I remember Dave talking about that on a video, and it might be useful to you then. Maybe not. So I refer to the world as the dreaming, right, or the illusion, and within it we seem to be born into it, right? Yet the impossibility of that, because if God is everything and eternity is the kingdom of God, etc., the impossibility of that as our reality, right, has to be recognized. Because if God is everything, I'm part of God, and God is formless, then what is this form? What is these shapes, this body, this physical thing that my mind tells me is real? Right? So I find myself in this experience of wondering, what is God? Where is God? It's as if I have this incredible amnesia. What am I here on the earth to do, really? Right? Now, the structures of thought prevalent on the earth will tell you that you're here to get a job, have kids, blah, 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 grow old and die like everybody else. But of course, there's another level to life running parallel with that, and slightly above it in the parallel to that, which is our spiritual journey, which is our mental cognition, if you like, of our awareness of ourself. And we can choose to be aware of ourself from one of two perspectives, from a loving awareness or from a fearful awareness. Right? If we think of ourselves or confuse ourselves with the body, which is just our vehicle for our experience here, it's going to get fearful, because the body gets old, seems to get sick and seems to die, and all of these sorts of things. If we align ourselves with our truth, our spiritual truth, that I am spirit and I am whole and perfect in eternity now, and I'm just a traveler here passing through on the journey of my soul, I can begin to look at the world and my experiences within the world from that perspective, and take on board the idea perhaps that I'm a student of life, and that everything that seems to be going on around me is either going to be a lesson or a blessing. It's that simple. It's either a lesson or a blessing. I'll know if it's a lesson because I'll get triggered, I'll be upset, I'll be miserable, I'll feel anxious, all of these things that don't align in me with an idea of unconditional love. And I say unconditional love because we have the idea of unconditional love, which everybody tries to work out what the hell is that. Sounds great. How do I put that into practice? And then there's conditional love, where if somebody just changed the way they reacted, I'd love them more, and all of these sorts of things. You know, if you only blah, blah, blah. Conditional love. So I often used to think, why doesn't anyone give you a handbook when you're born? A little guide, welcome to the world, this sort of thing. And of course it doesn't happen. And having come out of 2 world wars and everything like that, all of the spiritual knowledge that would have been fostered and passed down and handed down through generations prior to those world wars was kind of put aside, dropped and lost in that handing down process, or either that or swallowed up with religious observance and corrupted. And we find ourselves in the year 2022 where because of multimedia and social networking and all this sort of stuff, we're now only just beginning again to come back into a re-knitting, a reassociation of ourselves in a way where we're able to look at our lives through a spiritual view and realize that there is a higher purpose for being here. There is something we can do, and that is to purify our mind of fear, to release our minds from fear. So as we go through our relationships with our partners, with our schooling, with our teachers and mentors perhaps, with our siblings, with our parents, with our supermarket attendants, with our swim coach, with our whatever it is, music teacher, anything, we realize that we're actually in a teaching and learning relationship with everyone all the time. In that, there becomes no one whom we can't learn from. Right? Now, if you take on board that in your spiritual determination, in your spiritual journey, the goal of that journey has to be inner peace. We're not interested in the good or the bad or the right or the wrong, what the world tells us. We're looking for a peaceful life like the Buddha. We're looking for a peaceful life like Jesus, like Krishna, like any of those prophets and teachers before us that offered us inner peace and a way to salvation through that path of inner peace by being able to process our thinking. Now, when you're very young, the world's very attractive and it's like, wow, I want a fast car, or I want this job, or I want to go and find out, about courses and qualifications, and I want to get the trophy girlfriend and all of this, or boyfriend, and I want to be captain of the sports team, whatever. And there's all these sorts of things that seem to be a vast array of stuff that we can pick and choose from as goals within the world. But if we get caught up in all of those things, it's a fair bet that we're going to forget about our internal goal, our higher goal, which is inner peace. And so we'll find that we struggle with those relationships with sports events, people, situations and things, because even though we've set those as our superficial goals externally, we haven't attributed them to our higher purpose, which is allowing them also to be learning relationships for maintaining inner peace, right? And we'll be caught up in that turmoil of having to achieve and having to be the best of the best and all of this stuff. And, it's like, man, it's thick and it's hard work and it's easy to get caught up in that. But you can also set that goal of being the best of the best, but inner peace comes first. If you find that being the best of the best starts to drive you crazy and sends you into a depressive state and all of these sorts of things, you need to be able to apply the principles of forgiveness and letting go and tolerance and patience and empathy and all of these sorts of things across the board to your own relationship in that situation, so that your mind can be at peace while it's serving what it is that relationship as a collaborative endeavor, as a joining in the relationship actually is. Right? Every relationship, you need tools in the toolbox. If you go in with an untrained mind, if you go in with just this narrow-minded view of the whole thing, it's going to be hard work. You'll be going against the flow sometimes, and sometimes you'll feel like you're in it, and then other times, oh man, what happened? I was going so well, and then, But that's what happens when you get caught up with attachments about how things ought to look, or what you think your position within the relationship ought to be or should be, or what you think you have to get out of it. And of course, when you begin to apply spiritual principles such as letting go of all of those ideas and take on board that every moment's perfect unto itself, it's either a lesson or a blessing, you can learn to accept what you see as a lesson, and in the acceptance of the lesson, it will no longer bother you. It's when you're resisting that it's persisting, right? What you resist persists. So you find yourself in relationships that seem to trigger you, and you still keep trying to fight them, right? You still keep trying to get the better of the relationship, or have your own way, or control it. And it's learning to let go of control, learning to let go of what you think it ought to look like, and accept it exactly as it is, that will help to bring your mind back to a peaceful place where you can see the whole perspective of the situation as being the classroom for a lesson or a blessing. And then you can proceed with an open mind again. But in the idea that every relationship is giving you an opportunity to grow in the journey of your soul, or to better the record in the journey of your soul, let's say, it's advantageous to that journey if before you enter into a relationship, you just do a little mental check with yourself. All right, I'm going to embark in a new relationship. I'm joining a football team, or I'm going to go and ask this girl on a date, or boy on a date, or I'm going to do whatever it is I'm going to do, and I'm going to open myself up to greater experiences in the human world, in the experience of the physical world. If before you do that, you just make a little mental check, it's for the journey of my soul. It's not for what I can get out of it. It's for what I can heal within myself, for what it's going to show to me as my highest purpose within the relationship. And then everything else will just fall into place as I go along. Lesson or a blessing, right? You're here on a journey of the soul, and you come around and around again through the idea of reincarnation. And remember, I said you don't have to believe anything I'm telling you. It could be all hocus pocus and spiritual nonsense. But energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed. And as you go through your spiritual process, that's science, by the way. As you go through your spiritual processing, you'll find that you transform the way you see your relationships, and therefore the triggers and the things that were once there cease to be there, or if they are still there, you cease to react to them in the same way. You react to them in a more loving, a more compassionate, a more open, and a more peaceful way, allowing that energy to simply pass from you as a emotional release. Maybe you'll cry, scream, laugh, whatever, but you'll work out how to let it all go. It's just energy. I just want to let it go. But you can feel that energy when it's coming up. You can feel your trigger, right? Somebody says something not nice to you or whatever. It's like you can feel that you want to respond, and you want to like blah and say something back, rather than being grateful for them exposing a trigger in you. Did you hear that? Learn to be grateful for those people that expose a trigger in you, because if you don't take it on board as your responsibility, what you resist persists, and the next time it comes around, it's going to be a bit more insistent, until finally you get so fed up with it that you'll give yourself cancer, or you'll manifest a migraine, or whatever, right? Science will tell you, medicine will tell you, stress is a killer. Right? Learn to live a peaceful life. That's what you're in the world for, to master inner peace and achieve your salvation through the experience of union with the divine, your higher mind. Right? And that's a bit beyond what I want to offer in this video. That's more for those of you who are becoming to be more accomplished in the mastery of your spiritual principles. You'll start to realize that things take on a much more internal dialogue, or an internal perspective as you go along, and you'll begin to practice perhaps meditation and maybe even take on board some favourite mantras, and you may foster the art of prayer and all this sort of thing. But just as a general backdrop for the application of spiritual principles, it's helpful to have a story. It's helpful to have something that's relative that you can look at and examine and question in your own investigations regarding why I'm here, what's it all about? Because if you don't begin to answer those questions for yourself, you're going to be like just a reed blowing in the wind. Every way the wind blows, you're going to have to blow with it, and you'll be like, fuck, I was going this way one day, and now I'm going that, and now this, and now that. When will I ever find peace? When will I ever just be happy? You'll be happy when you're peaceful, I guarantee it. And if you're a very younger child, you'll probably relate to this. You may even remember it. I remember having a beautiful experience one day sitting in our meditation room in the, well, not in the room itself, but in the lunch annex where we would sit and have lunch or coffee and tea and stuff. And behind me was the play area for little kids. We used to have a creche there, and parents would be on a roster basis to look after the kids while meditation was on. And behind me on the couch, my friend and I were having a cuppa on the couch behind us, on the couch down behind the couch, up against the wall, was two very small children. And one of them said to the other one, the older one said to the young one, "I'm beginning to forget what God looks like. Do you still remember?" And I think it was my brother Stan, who has been participating there for some years, and we both heard it, and we looked at each other, and it's just like, oh man, so beautiful, such a beautiful and touching moment there. Like, I loved it. You know, it's like there's a place where the innocence of children begins to get corrupted by the world, and usually by the time they're about 8 years old, maybe a little earlier, but 7 or 8 years old, the ego, which is that voice for the physical nature of things, begins to kick in, and judgment starts. And up until then, I mean, children are our most beneficial teachers. Really, they are. We shout at them and yell at them and try to get them to conform to the way of being in the world. But it's like, truly step back from trying to do that with your kids. I'm not saying don't discipline them and don't teach them and don't prepare them for what's to come, but learn to recognize the moment when that's actually necessary, and not just turn it into some kind of dogmatic response to everything they do. You know, let them be kids, let them grow up and enjoy that innocence, and offer it to us who've become entrenched in judgment and now need this path of spirituality where we have to forgive ourselves for our judgment and accept God's forgiveness for our judgments, so that we can begin to recognize in ourselves that playful innocence again, and be able to relax in our journey and enjoy our journey, and you know, recognize when the work is there to be done, when there's triggers, and be grateful when the work's not there to be done, when we're just at peace. Right? Learn the processing. There's another beautiful book for a bit older kids, if they get through those other ones, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, Kahlil, I think it is, Gibran, Gibran, The Prophet, Prophet, not Profit. And Eckhart Tolle, his book The Power of Now, for probably late teens, early 20s, The Power of Now, and any age beyond that, parents, like into old age. That's an incredible book. The Disappearance of the Universe, which I would recommend as a companion book to A Course in Miracles, which is the book that I utilize in all of my teachings and all of my classes, workshops and everything with adults, which I have found nothing on earth comparable, and the most incredible teaching, spiritual teaching that I've found. And I've read so many books over the years that I've forgotten more than I can remember. All right, well, I hope that's been helpful. Just remember, it's either a lesson or a blessing. If it's a lesson, you got to learn how to do the work. You got to learn to forgive, to step back, to let go, and recognize that you're in a journey of trusting the universe, trusting the divine, rather than trying to decide how you want it to look, how you think it ought to look. Because you have to recognize, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what it's all about. And without that admission, the arrogance of the ego is going to stamp its foot and go, well, I want it this way. I want it that way. I'm entitled to be respected. I'm entitled to power. I'm entitled to all this stuff. Bullshit. You're entitled to nothing. You can't answer the mystery of life for yourself. You're entitled to nothing. But I guarantee you that you're entitled to miracles. And as you go along in your spiritual journey, you'll learn to be miracle-minded and trust the universe, trust the divine, trust God. And often it's in the very last moment where that trust is rewarded, and having faith, where it's rewarded. And I would encourage you to question life to the max. Question everything. Question what I've told you here in this video. Don't take my word for it, even though my word for it is verbatim for me, like God is a fact. Not God as in church, God as in the power of the universe, like the force, my own internal higher mind, my connectedness to everything. That God. Oneness. Universal love. That's a reality for me. It's no longer something I wonder about. I've experienced it. All right, I hope that's helpful. I love you. And just remember those books. Please don't write to me asking what the books were. Rewind the video, watch it again. It's going to be more helpful than you can possibly imagine. All right. Peace.